In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless our conversation, guide us to the truth, convict our hearts of your love for us. Allow us to radiate that love to everyone we meet, and allow us to be compassionate and welcome to all those who you place in our lives. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Can you just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you were born and your family and...
So I told Teresa that I wanted this to recreate an experience of something like having me over for dinner. And I am a melancholic, I'm an introvert. And what that means is also that if I think that there's something worth doing, I think it's worth doing well. And so I told Teresa I'm going to be really honest. I'm going to talk about, bring a lot of things out about my life so that you can really know who I am. Who's this like random person that just got here in July, who's preaching to us every week, who's giving me advice and confession. And so I want you to really, get to know me so that you can trust me, and then hopefully we can build a relationship from that as well. I am 29 years old. I was just ordained, obviously a priest, this past June. And my family is originally from Mexico, from the southern part of the state. And how many of you have ever watched the movie For Greater Glory? For Greater Glory, okay, awesome. Highly recommend it. It's a really great movie. Hardly anyone knows about what occurred in the 1920s during the persecution of the Catholic Church in Mexico, where priests were killed and many faithful were also killed as well. Churches burned. But it's a great movie that talks about that era and sort of the anti-religious culture that we find in Mexico even today, where priests today, there's not a restriction against wearing clerics, but still there's effects from that era where priests will not feel comfortable wearing clerics. But anyways, that town where that movie takes place is about an hour away from my hometown, my parents' hometown in Mexico. And so that if you watch that movie, that gives you a good idea of what the culture of my background is like. It's funny because the South in America has a very much same feeling of the South in Mexico, where it's very country style, very agricultural, very small town, family values, that kind of thing. Not saying that the North doesn't have family values, Deacon Rich. But you kind of get the idea. My parents are incredible. I was at a conference a few months ago, and it was a Hispanic youth conference. And one of the questions, I was on this panel, one of the questions was, who is your hero? And I was the last one. And obviously some people said the saints, certainly John Paul II, Mother Teresa are part of my squad. But people that I really look up to and who I think about their life experience are my parents, because their life experience is so very different from mine. And they've shown me what it is to have faith, what it is to suffer well, to persevere, to adapt in new environments, and certainly that's something that I'm doing these days. And so that image of the reality of their lives gives me so much encouragement. My dad, he only went to second grade, and after that he had to tend the flock, the cows and sheep and all these things. And then eventually when he turned 12, his father, my grandfather, was in California working. And back then our town didn't have telephones or anything like that. So he and my uncle walked all the way up from southern Mexico all the way up to California, and almost didn't survive the journey, but went to go look for my grandfather. And it was at that point that my dad began this migration journey throughout America, working in fields, trying to better his life and save money, which he wasn't really that good at. But he ended up working in many fields out in California, picking watermelon, picking strawberries, picking grapes, you name it, he picked it. He ended up in Traverse City picking cherries in Michigan. He ended up in Maine picking blueberries up there. He ended up in Florida picking oranges. And so that's kind of like his life. And every other year, he would go back to Mexico and enjoy the fruits of his labor, so to say. Really treat himself when he was down there. But most of everything that he accumulated with his finances, he gave to my grandmother. That's just a big act of filial piety in our culture to make sure that the parents have what they need. And in one of those trips, he met my mother. And my mother at the time, who only went to middle school, was discerning with a group of sisters who were teaching at the Catholic school in our hometown. And my mother was the only lay person teaching at the time. It was only sisters. And so she was really invested in their lifestyle and really thinking about this. For the patronal feast day of our town, the whole town shuts down. And there's a huge festival in the center of town. And everyone is there. All los norteños, all the northerners who are working in America are back for that season. It's near Christmas time, so it's from December 12th from Our Lady of Guadalupe until February 2nd. It's constant party. And so the patronal feast day of my hometown falls on January 24th. And there's 9 days of novenas and processions and just lots of celebrations, lots of foods, lots of music. And my mother was in the town square one night. And there's a tradition in my hometown where women walk one way and the men walk the other way. And if you want to ask a woman to begin a relationship with her, you would ask her to take a walk around the town square, and then you would complete one whole loop. And if she was interested, she would say, "Let's take another." And if she was not, she said, "Okay, I'll see you later." So my dad came up to my mother and asked her to take a walk around La Plaza, around the town square. And my mother said yes to another trip. Their dating courtship lasted for 10 years. So they met, my mother was young when they met, and she was very faithful for long distance relationships, 3 letters a year. That's how that worked. She prayed a lot to St. Joseph. She had a huge devotion to him to keep my dad safe wherever he was. And my dad would return back to Mexico. Eventually, in 1988, they got married, and my dad was penniless when they got married, because everything he had, he would give to my grandmother. And I don't know what my grandmother did with that money. But when my parents got married, they needed to come to America to make a living. And my parents, especially my mother, they thought they would only come to America for 3 years, to make money and to go back to Mexico and build a family life over there. But I feel like if you can ask David, but I feel like everyone that comes here probably has that mentality of only spending a few years and then they head back. And, they end up getting tied down with children, with a mortgage, with insurance, with bills, and before you know it, you've been here for 15 years, and the 3-year plan is out the window. And that happened to my family. But again, my parents, just to think about the obstacles that they overcame, because they literally came with only the clothes that they were wearing when they came from Mexico, and an image of the Sacred Heart. and which was the name of the religious order that my mother was going to join. So it was the image that they had for this group of sisters. And we still have that Sacred Heart in our living room. And I remember when I was in 8th grade, going to public school, we had a show and tell of the most valuable thing that your family has, and I took that image to that show and tell that one time. But my parents, when they came to America, they struggled like a lot. They had to live with relatives, sleep on the floors, wake up at 4 in the morning. My mother, who was a teacher, all of a sudden was in the fields picking tomatoes and working from sun up to sundown. And she said that the individuals who would, I guess, manage them, they would just keep going. It would rain, she said, and then the sun would be so hot that their clothes would dry from the very heat. And so you just keep going, you would keep working in the rain, because the way that worked is you were paid by the bucket, not by the hour. And so you wanted to keep going to fill as many buckets as you could of whatever produce they were picking at the time. And so you just kept going through. And so some people wouldn't take lunch breaks, they would skip breakfast and they would just get a tomato and eat it while they're out there working in the fields. And to think that, my mother, she goes from teaching to working out in the fields. Whenever I see my voicemail that I have like 10 voicemails and I need to respond, I'm like, I'm not going to complain. I'm not going to complain because I think about her, that she overcame those sorts of difficulties, and she was very creative in trying to find other means. She said there was a gas station near the trailer that they were living. And she, when it would rain, or I don't remember how this would work, but she would take cables and she would go and put them in the ground to go and pick so that the worms would come out. And she would put them in a bucket and then take them to the gas station so that individuals who would go fish, I've never done any of this, but individuals who go fish could buy the live worms. And she would make a little bit of money on the side, like that. Eventually they got a really, a more stable job, a job that wasn't too intense. That my dad's been working there since 1992, working in a greenhouse, like the Metro Line that's here. It's the sister company, Van Wengerden, in the western part of the state. And my parents worked there. My dad's been working there since then. My mom would work there. And then eventually she left because it just wasn't good for her health-wise. It's very intense, probably more intense than picking tomatoes because of the physical posture you're constantly at, where, like for example, my dad specializes in poinsettias, and poinsettias require a pinching every month where you break off a leaf in order to create what's the flower, because it's green leaves until you pinch it and then it creates the red flower or the white flower of what you see there during Christmas. And so you're constantly on the ground pinching, and my mother, it was just too intense for her. So she stepped away from that. Family life was pretty, just as an immigrant family, you don't really see your parents that often because they're working, from sun up to sundown. So you're at some aunt's house or some neighbor's house. So that kind of thing. And so while, me and my sister have talked about that with now she's raising her children, I don't disparage it because I think those kinds of events in my life have given me the capacity to be independent, to be able to work my way around without needing Specific guidance, maybe Father John may say otherwise. but it helps. It's helped me be innovative, and that increased even more so whenever I was in the 8th grade, when my mother became pregnant with my brother, and she had a very difficult pregnancy. And eventually she would go to the hospital, she would be placed in the hospital. And unfortunately, that ended with a miscarriage. And my parents took it really hard. During that time, she was in the hospital for about 3 months of the pregnancy, so it was a late miscarriage. And during the time, me and my sister were staying at my aunt's house. Again, I think those moments, just make you stronger, and they increase your faith. And especially thinking about what my parents held on to, that image of the Sacred Heart. And I remember on my mother's hospital bed, there being a rosary. And, in spite of whatever difficulties they went through, their faith was the only thing that was constant in a very, turbulent household. But I remember telling the bishop this whenever I had to go to one of the fundraising dinners and give my vocation story, that whenever my mother came back from the hospital after miscarrying, she fell into a deep clinical depression, where she was heavily medicated and she was not working, and was just very much spending her time in bed, and my father working long hours. So as a kid, on the weekends, I learned to make myself breakfast. I learned to do my own laundry. I learned to clean up after myself. I learned to make my mother food, bring her food, take care of her. And I told the bishop that while at those moments, anyone would want to avoid them, I embrace them, because they gave me a deep compassion to be able to desire to help someone who can't help themselves, to help my mother. I feel like maybe it's not that common. Maybe definitely I could say that there's an injustice being done, because it should be the other way around. But those moments where I could take care of my mother, I wouldn't trade it for the world, because I think that allowed me to see a wounded Christ that even serves my vocation today. And I've gone to the hospital even as a seminarian, where I go see a Hispanic woman who reminds me so much of my mother. And I think to myself, this is what that prepared me for. And it illuminates my vocation. And again, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And another experience, I think, that really illuminated, where I'm at today and what God had already planned, was our trips to Mexico every other year. When we were kids, every other year my parents would take us to Mexico to spend Christmas and New Year's down there. And essentially, we would drive from Hendersonville all the way to Michoacan, which is a 36-hour trip. But I loved it. I loved those trips. And I loved it because my dad would become a different person when we go to Mexico. It's like, in America, he was very much work. When we would step into the car to go home, it's like his life went from black and white to color. And he would just exude all these stories, and he would just, start talking to us about his childhood, of riding horses in the fields, of, picking, wild fruits and things like that. So I loved it. I loved seeing my parents talk in that way about their upbringing. There was a part of Mexico that we had to drive through called Matehuala, in the state of San Luis Potosí. And it was a very intense drive as a kid, and at any age, I guess. Because at that time, haven't driven through Mexico since 2006, but at the time, there would be, for a long strip of the road, just kids, women, and other elderly individuals just going like this, asking for you to pull over to give them money or to give them bread or some other kind of sustenance. And I remember seeing kids my age. I think that was when I was in the 8th or 9th grade when I remember this. And I would think to myself, that's how I knew I was melancholic even back then. I would think to myself, looking back on that experience, is like, why is it that I'm in this car with air conditioning and there's this other child my age outside begging for food? And I had
That's such a melancholic thought.
it's such a melancholic thought.
I feel you.
And I would stare out the window and look at these people, and I would break my heart. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what? When I grow up, I'm going to make a lot of money in America. I'm going to come and build an apartment complex, and at least they can have somewhere to stay and to live. So that left a huge impression on me throughout my time. Eventually, it came to be the time for me to go to college. And my dad only going to 2nd grade, my mother only going through middle school. They're like, "What? You graduated high school? Like that's good. You made it. You made it in life." And I explained to them like, now I have to go to college and I have to live away from home. Explaining that to my grandparents is not the easiest. Even I was telling Father Becker the other day that even as a 28, well, I was 28 at the time, as a 28-year-old priest, I was really hungry in the middle of the night, around 10 p.m. And I was gonna go out and get a burger, and my dad's like, "Where are you going?" It's like, "Don't you know what time? No, you're not gonna go anywhere. You're in here." And I'm like, "Okay." Migrant, so that's kind of how it is. But I was very good at math in high school. I was in mathletes. I would go compete at Western Carolina, but I would always get beat by 6th graders from Carolina Day School. So that was just anyways, a very humbling experience. But I was very good at math, so I loved engineering. I already knew when I was a senior in high school what company I wanted to work for. I wanted to work for Arriva, which is an engineering firm from France. I speak French. I took French in high school, and I was like, I got an A. I speak French. I'm really good at math. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to minor in French, minor in engineering, do internships, co-ops, all these things, and apply with this company who just opened an office in Charlotte, and they're going to be looking for someone. I'm the guy. I'm going to make money. I'm going to find a wife, and I'm going to live life well. Well, that's
Here you are.
not the case. College was intense because while I was good at math, I hated physics for some reason. And I struggled to really be invested in my courses. And so I spent so much time not doing homework. Doing pious procrastination is what I used to call it. I would pray a rosary, I would read scripture, I would do everything except to spend time in the lab. I joined campus ministry. I was there Monday nights, I was there Sunday nights, I was there Wednesday nights. I taught catechism and confirmation when I was in college. I mean, you name it, I was there. Was I hitting the books? No, I wasn't. All the while, my parents were paying for all these things. And my mother working overtime, my dad working overtime, putting me through college, they said, we don't want you to have a part-time job. We came to America for you to to be successful. We're living out our desire for you. It's like, don't bother getting a part-time job. We want you to focus on school, which I wasn't. I was piously procrastinating. Eventually, the pious procrastination had its consequences, and this is where I'm going to get really honest, that I was placed on academic probation from the School of Engineering. And that was an extremely stressful time. Knowing all the sacrifices that my parents had, made to put me through school, and I was messing it up. And so I was summoned to a meeting with the assistant dean of the School of Engineering at UNC Charlotte. Her name is Dr. Patricia Tolley. And there was 2 other people who were there for the same reason, who were also on academic probation and were summoned as well. And they came out of the meeting smiling. So I was like, okay, it's not that bad. I went into the meeting, and she sat me down, and she said, I'm going to suspend you from the School of Engineering because you are not taking this seriously. You are a minority. You have no idea what opportunities you could have. You're not doing well in your classes. And so explain to me what's going on. She was there, as a matter of fact. And I said to her, I was very honest. I said, I'm not like your other students who are partying on the weekends, who are partying from Thursday to Sunday, and then cramming for their test and doing well. I'm really struggling right now, and I blurted it out. I said, I don't know if I'm supposed to be a priest. And that she and I said, I know you probably don't understand what that means or what ramifications that has on making a decision in life, but that's kind of where I'm at. And she said, she paused, and there was some silence, and she said, you should be a priest. and I was like, come again? And I even gave her reasons why that wasn't the case, why I was called to be an engineer. And then she told me, I think you should be a priest. And as a matter of fact, I just came back to the church a week ago. I've been away from the church, and I've been watching this nun on this channel, EWTN, and I have just now come back to the church, and I know we need good priests, and I know we need priests in the church, and there you have it. And Dr. Patricia Tolley is a good friend. She was actually at my ordination here in June, and she's an on-fire parishioner at St. Thomas Aquinas, the parish in front of UNC Charlotte. And my ordination happened to be her birthday that day as well. So there's so many so many connections with her, which I should get in contact with her. But I argued more. I said, no, give me another shot. Allow me to take physics again for the 3rd time, and let me try to resurrect this dream, because there's so much riding on this. I promised my dad a farm with horses and all these things. Like, I need to do this for my parents. And so that happened. She said, okay, fine, you gave one more shot. If you don't do well, you're done. And a 3rd. And I didn't do well. And I thought to myself, well, what am I passionate about? Because it's obviously not engineering. But what am I passionate about? And I'm passionate about my parents' experience, my parents' journey in America, and I thought to myself, well, maybe I could do immigration law and help individuals who have struggled, like my parents, to regularize their status in America to help their families. And I changed my major to political science. All that was going well. I was getting all A's, loved it, made great friends. I emailed randomly the immigration courthouse here in Charlotte. I said, I'm a student, I want an internship with you guys, give me an interview. I had an interview, bombed the interview. They gave me a position. And I was like, yes, this is, like, life is working out for me. I can, make all this money and do what I intended to do. All the while, people telling me, you think we should be a priest. Not happy in my spirituality, not happy with my spiritual life or my relationship with the Lord. And I remember it was that year, 2012, at the Congress, at the Eucharistic Congress, that I went with campus ministry down there. And I remember seeing the priest of our diocese and the sisters, the proclaimers, interact with people. And I would see this joy that I would find to be very attractive. And I went to go speak to a seminarian, and I told him what my concerns were. And he said, just do it. Just jump in. Which, as a melancholic, you don't do that. you don't just jump into anything. But he said, just jump in. And there was some confidence about the way he said this, who's now Father Chris Bond, who's pastor up in Maggie Valley. That I immediately got home to my apartment and I emailed the vocations director and began the process. And I said, I have an opportunity to go to law school next year. I'm about to graduate, or to go to seminary. I could always go to law school after that, so I'm going to give seminary a shot. The application process to go through all the security screenings and background checks for the Department of Justice was as lengthy as to go through the Diocese of Charlotte. And so I was like, I'm not going to do both. And so I'm not going to do the Department of Justice internship. I'm just going to dedicate everything to this. Go all in, go into the deep. And I entered seminary, as Sarah once told me about Narnia, about Aslan, that he's described as good but not safe. Seminary was good, but it's not safe. Parish life is good, but it's not safe. And it was intense, but the Lord gave me perseverance to go through. And last summer, I found myself here at St. Mark's as a deacon. And I eventually spent four weeks here. And then as a part of a program with the seminary, I went to go do migrant work in the very fields that my father used to work at, surprisingly enough. And I got to see the way they work and the conditions the migrants live in. And it was very eye-opening, just to see, what conditions my father himself put himself under to work for a better condition for his family, for his parents. And the most striking one was when we were in the Coachella Valley. There were a group of migrants there who would pick grapes and almonds. And there was a center, a nonprofit center started by a very devout Catholic woman. And essentially, what the center is there's sort of like a Goodwill, like a thrift store, where it operates as a business to provide shelter and food for the migrants. And there's a room like this where they sleep in cots and public showers where they shower. And they leave around 6 or 5 a.m. to go work. They're out in the fields working all day, and they come back around 9 p.m. to shower, to do the same thing the next day, and the next day. And you kind of get the idea. And I was over at the Hoyts one of my first weeks here, and they knew that I had gone to California. They wanted to know what I had learned about when I was over there. And really what I learned was that when you're in that position, you're sort of reduced to some sort of lawn instrument, sort of like a lawnmower, where your life is all utility. You're like an instrument for agriculture that your only existence while you're awake is to do something and then to come back. And there's no really sense of family. You're kind of cut off from all that. when you're in this position. And I think in the political debates on both sides of the party, that dynamic of who we're dealing with sort of gets lost on sides where we say, there are 11 million undocumented immigrants in America, where there is a narrative of let's deport everyone, all these 11 million people. They are simply numbers on a page. When there is another narrative of let's give amnesty to 11 million people, and let's be amicable to them, to maybe potentially gain voter registration. Again, they're just numbers on a page. But to see an individual as a person, to see these people not as numbers on a page, but to see them as complex, a mystery, as John Paul would say, to see them in that way is the Catholic perspective. And that's why with the issue of immigration, unlike the issue with abortion, there's more nuance there. There's more opportunity for an individual to form their conscience with a specific case. I'm very suspicious of, and I don't mean to propose any public policy, but I am suspicious of policies that have a one and done solution, because every situation needs to be looked at with the great reverence that the individual deserves. Whether that individual doesn't belong here and is not good for this country, or whether this individual has invested, contributes, and has a family here, and is potentially a fellow parishioner here as well. And so that is more difficult to do, to comb through these cases, but it's the dignity, it's the human dignity that they deserve to be recognized. Again, not like numbers on a page, not like an instrument for work, but as a human person, a person who is complex, a person who has dreams, aspiration, who is reducing themselves to the state, not for themselves, but for someone else waiting back home, who forgoes language, culture, family tradition, even religion as well, in order to seek happiness, to seek a better world for those that they love. Obviously, there are individuals who abuse the migration, and I think, speaking from having a lot of family members still in Mexico, a lot of organized crime takes advantage of the illegal immigration that happens on the southern border. The economy of narcotics depends on that flow, to provide for a country that consumes narcotics, and this perpetuates greater crime in Mexico. Just recently, one of my cousin's relatives was kidnapped for ransom and asked for some absurd amount of money, and luckily they were able to get them back. So that's a reality that a lot of people live with in Mexico with organized crime that depends on this flow. So it's an issue that brings about a lot of suffering. It's an issue that a lot of people are frustrated with, but there's not a one and done solution to just to say we'll stop this or we'll deport these people. But that's why the church gives principles, and she says it's a respect of life issue, because it requires us to recognize the human dignity of these people. But she doesn't say that a country should execute X or Y policy, and that's because it requires our efforts to really comb through the cases and see which ones are really worthy. I mean, not worthy, but which ones are really would would merit to stay in America, and which have bad intentions to be here. It wouldn't be for the common good of our country. But a country, of course, the church teaches, has the right to defend its borders. But it also has the obligation to give charity to those in need. And so that's sort of where, I'd like to wrap that up.
Yeah, thank you,
Father Gámez, I'm just curious what your parents thought about when all this stuff was going on with school, and you were kind of like, oh, I'm not going to be an engineer. I was also planning on being an engineer and change things up. My parents were like, okay, but I didn't tell them that I wanted to be a priest. So I'm just curious what their reaction was and how they handled it.
Right, that's a very good question. When I stopped when I changed my major, my parents were extremely frustrated because they're like, does this mean 4 more years? What does this mean for you? Excuse me. And so they didn't understand that process, but they just accepted it. They trusted me. They knew I was a diligent individual who, well, maybe not so diligent, but they trusted me enough to just sort of give me my space and continue to support me. When I told them I wanted to be a priest, my mother was on board. My dad was not on board because my dad was very much like, and I think we won't see a lot of vocations from immigrants for this reason. Because the idea is, I came to America for you to have a career. If you were going to be a priest, we could have just stayed in Mexico and saved us all this heartache. So my dad, that's how he took it. My mother, who was already had an inclination to a vocation herself, was super excited and just said, yeah, go for it. My dad has come around like like no other, and advertises me too much, if you know what I mean. Like he's assumed this role as like the patriarch in Hendersonville, and I'm like, Dad, you can't do that. About what I'm learning, that changes everyone's position closer to the Lord. Aunts and uncles, cousins, everyone has just drastically, they naturally have to just come closer to Him because, I became a symbol, even as a seminarian, of their relationship with God. And so, I wouldn't be wearing clerics in Mexico when I was a seminarian. And I would see my relatives, and they would immediately be like, I haven't been to church because of this. And I would be like, I'm not even asking, it's okay. But they would feel accused just for my presence. And that dynamic served in a good way to bring everyone closer to the faith, including my father. So, yeah.
Thank you, Father. One thing I've always wondered about priests discovering their vocations, especially in your case. You had this whole plan, this whole dream laid out that you were pursuing, but you were not happy in college with your engineering degree and career path and all that. But you were obviously very faithful. So I was just curious, outside of, the tugging of the Holy Spirit, how did you finally get to that point of, this is what I'm called to do, and not just, well, you know what, I just don't like this path I'm on, but I'm kind of using, not using my faith, but kind of hiding in just, the stuff that would help me piously procrastinate, things like that.
Right. So I think the Lord speaks. The church says that this is how it is. That your vocation is the way the Lord speaks through your desires. And I was acting out on my desires when I would go to, spend more time in campus ministry and more time in the church. But I was very much negotiating, compromising on those desires when I still wanted to do something else. When I had this other ideal that conflicted with what I know to be my vocation. And so, not assuming that, not living out those desires, really felt like I was living an empty life. And really, I mean, it really drained me. Like, I was not happy. I was very agitated. And something needed to change. And I was very short with my parents when I would go home. And I was very short with cousins, with friends, and just very impatient, very cynical, sarcastic. You know, I would go to holy hours, and I would pray, go to confession, and experience something that felt no growth. And in 2012, my family, we went to a vacation in Florida, and I was walking on the beach alone, very melancholic. And my mother knew something was wrong, and she asked me, because I was watching the presidential elections in Mexico that night. I was up late at night. She came out and she asked me, "Are you happy?" And that's such an accusatory question. And I told her no. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with my life. And that question was, something that really then came back when I went to the Congress and saw the joy in the sisters and saw the joy in the priests. And I have to ask myself, like, why am I not happy? Why am I not, fulfilled if I have everything? I have this great internship. Everything is falling into place that I should say I should be the best version of myself. But now that I have realized my vocation, it was because I wasn't fulfilling the desires that the Lord has placed in my heart. And instead I was stifling those desires. And I needed to jump into those desires, so to say.
So, since you've been ordained, what's been the biggest surprise for you being a priest?
The biggest surprise for me is so I've always heard that, and I'm a very suspicious individual, but I've always heard that there's moments of the Holy Spirit that He comes in and something happens and it's not you, and He just gives you the words. And I'll give you an example, and I have been pleasantly surprised that is the case, that the Holy Spirit does do that. And I'll give you two examples. Right? The first one was that I was terrified of giving anyone last rites. I'll anoint the sick because they still have some time to go. but to give someone last rites, and for me to be the last person that they see on God's green earth is a lot of pressure. What am I going to say? My first day here on July 9th, even before my assignment began, I was in the office. And I was like, okay, I'm going to settle in. Just put my books in the shelf and everything. And Leanne comes in. It's like, there's 2 people dying, and it's Father Becker's on vacation, Father John's day off. Can you go? I'm like, I guess. So I go and immediately jump into one of my biggest fears. And it was a very grace-filled moment for me to be able to say that. And there was another situation where I had to go give last rites in Charlotte, and I get really frustrated to drive all the way to Presbyterian because I'm a homebody. I'd love to stay on campus. I'd love to stay I'm at the office as much as I can, just to be, available and to be stable. And to get an emergency call to drive to Presbyterian is a challenge for me, especially at 4 p.m. to drive on 77 at 4 p.m. is not fun. And so I'm frustrated, annoyed, and I'm like, I'm not going to say something good to this person because I'm not in a good disposition. And I can't, that hospital is so complicated as well. And I go up to a room, it's not her room, I had to go somewhere else. And I go in, I finally find the room. I go in, I'm still in a bad mood. And I open the door, and there's this old woman there, who's in her last days. And immediately she looks up at me, she's confused and she's scared. And she says, "Who are you?" And she has some sort of dementia. And something came over me, and she said, and I said something that like I would not say naturally. I said, "I have been sent by God to tell you that He loves you." And her face lit up, and it's like she had lucidity. She knew exactly who I was, what I was there to do, and it was incredibly remarkable. My bad mood was put on pause, resumed after for the dry back. but it was just incredible. And we have our funeral on Monday now. And to be able to witness things like that deeply affirm my faith. To say there was something beyond any of my natural capacities, which aren't many, to minister to someone, which is pretty remarkable. So that's been a very awesome surprise in the ministry.
Father Gámez, question about the immigration. It seems so overwhelming to us sitting here in Huntersville, North Carolina. How can we help? What is it that we can do to help the dignity of these immigrants?
Yes.
And that they're not just numbers. Suggestions?
Yes, I think every social issue, and this is a big statement, I think every social issue goes down to the breakdown of the family. I think the hardest thing that you can do is to be with your family. It requires so much sacrifice, patience, and love to spend time at home with individuals who will frustrate you and annoy you. But I think Mother Teresa of Calcutta used to say, you don't have to go to Calcutta to help the poor. You can stay at home and do this. And what I mean by this is it's a domino effect, the immigration issue. Broken families in America creates broken individuals who then seek some sort of escape from the pain of reality. And what do they seek? What do they use as an escape? They use narcotics. They use drugs that are probably imported from Mexico. That fuels an economy that perpetuates the conditions for people to want to leave their country of origin. Without that, you could have someone who can have a business, who can open a bakery and then provide means for their family. With organized crime being continued on, you have the cartels going through the town taxing a family business, saying if you want to sell bread, you have to give the cartel this much money every month. And I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're going to do it. And so it's something small, but we have to sanctify the family in America that can sanctify the individuals who will stop seeking outs from reality to address the pain of a broken family, that will then stop fueling the economy of organized crime, that will stop the conditions creating for individuals to leave their country of origin. That's what I think. It's something small. It's something people don't think. People think it could be something like public policy. Sure, public policy might help with certain things, but this gets to the heart of the issue, I think. Yeah.
I have a question. It has nothing to do with you.
Okay, awesome.
But I am a New Yorker from the start. And I was from the Brooklyn Diocese, and there's big articles now about Mother Cabrini. And she was a wonderful person that established like 26 Catholic schools there and so on and so forth. And Mayor de Blasio and his wife have put the kibosh on putting any kind of a statue up for her. And all the immigrants and the immigrant families in the Brooklyn Diocese, mainly Italians, and but there was 1,000 people on a march the other day that went through the city and saying, why can't we have a statue in a public place to Mother Cabrini? And it's just so disheartening to see that the people that they're trying to put in are so against the Catholics and the Catholic Church and all their policies. And they have I think it's called the She Too movement or something like that. And I'm just so disheartened, and I don't know how to even pray about it. And I don't know how to send messages to people that I know that are still living up there.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, actually. So I think it's very interesting because a lot of New Yorkers are descendants of Irish, Italian, German, Polish immigrants who were very devout Catholic, who built enormous and beautiful churches out of their sweat and labor. And then generations down, the faith has dwindled out to allow there to be hostility to the faith. Sorry. I think we have the risk of that being repeated again. And if we haven't learned our lesson from the past, it will happen again with the Hispanic immigrant children.
Yes.
Because Hispanic parents are very devout, are very strong on their faith, have a huge devotion to Our Lady, to the Eucharist, have a huge reverence for the priesthood. The children, on the other hand, have a great risk of becoming indifferent to the faith. And that's where the hostility can grow, can take root. And so how does this happen? I think it happens, and I saw it happen in college, when there's not this understanding that your faith is something beyond the culture, and you realize that you don't identify with that culture anymore, then you throw out the baby with the bathwater when you become Americanized. When a Hispanic child, son of immigrants, realizes that they're more American than their parents, they see the faith and the piety of their parents as part of their culture and something they did. And so they remove themselves from that and they seek something else, a different way for them. They said, Mom and Dad, that was good for you, but I'm an American and this is what I do. And so what Hispanic, we have, the church in America has said we have the nuncio, the apostolic nuncio has said we have a Hispanic moment in the church in America. And I think what we need to do is evangelize the younger culture to say, no, your faith is beyond your culture. Your faith transcends. Your faith is true for someone who is here, someone who's in Japan, someone who's in Africa, someone who's in Russia, someone who's in Europe. It speaks to you as a human person beyond being a Hispanic. And if we can get to that, then the faith will be transmitted. It will resonate with them in spite of their culture, and it won't provide the environment for hostile ideologies to be planted. Because I will tell you, Hispanic immigrant children are very easily swayed for more progressive issues. It's really like a lot of my contemporaries, a lot of my classmates are very much accepting of just a lot of social issues that are against our Catholic teaching. And so in two homes, you have two different cultures with now two different sets of values. Something happened there. And that's where we need to really, address it now, or else all the evangelization and work that we're doing for Hispanics will be in vain, because the baton will not be passed.
Thank you.
Just a different take, perhaps, but before you said when you were in Mexico looking at the poor people in that one area, you decided to come back and build them this huge complex. And you were focused at that point on taking care of their physical needs. And that meant for you making money, getting a great job in America. When your daddy heard about your vocation, his first thought was not, oh my goodness, isn't this wonderful, my son has a vocation for God, but, you're not going to get the good job. You're not going to make the money that you will. I think sometimes, it's not because if we're replacing a culture, the Polish culture or the German culture, but I think we're replacing God with our desires for being wealthy or being, powerful or being something else. And that's what our culture, I think, is teaching our children. They don't just say, get rid of God, get rid of your culture, but they're saying, we've got something that's a greater God. We've got something for you to pursue here that it's within your reach in this country. And all you got to do is lie and cheat and do all these things, and they become second nature. I mean, I'm just rambling, but that's another take on what I see happen.
And I would say I became very unsatisfied with realizing that I could by being an immigration lawyer, I could potentially help people normalize their legal status, but that won't necessarily make them citizens of heaven. As a priest, I can help them become citizens of heaven, where there is their true home. To realize that the luxury, you can be legal, you can be successful. That doesn't mean you're going to be happy. There's something deeper there. That's a deeper happiness that the church affords, and I would be, more willing to endeavor in that adventure. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Blessed Mother, we give you thanks for this evening. We give you thanks for your fiat. Mother, give us the example and the encouragement to always accept the Lord's will in our lives, trusting that suffering or any mishap can always be used for the greater glory of our Lord. We place our lives in your hands as we say, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. The Lord be with you, and may Almighty God bless you, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God bless, guys.
Thank you.